Welcome to FM Podcast, where we discuss a range of topics. This program is possible by viewers like you. Please subscribe, like, and share. Efforts are made in making these podcasts. You can also help us financially. Links are in the description. Today we will talk about the fall of dictatorship, the 50 years of Assad family rule. Once again, thanks for joining us.
Syria's Assad regime, once thought unshakable, has fallen overnight. Today we're diving into how a 50-year dictatorship crumbled in days and what it means for the future of the Middle East.
That's right, and it's hard to overstate just how significant this moment is. We've just received reports of opposition forces entering Damascus, the capital city of Syria. It's a stunning development that marks the end of the Assad family's nearly half-century rule over the country.
You know, what's particularly striking is how quickly it seems to have happened. We have reports of Syrian government soldiers abandoning their posts, leaving behind their uniforms as they fled. It's as if the regime just crumbled overnight. After years of brutal civil war and seemingly intractable conflict, the end came with surprising swiftness.
So what led to this sudden collapse? It seems almost unbelievable after such a long and bloody conflict.
Well, it's a combination of factors. The regime had been weakened by years of international sanctions, internal dissent, and military losses. But the tipping point seems to have been a series of rapid advances by opposition forces in the past few weeks. They managed to capture key strategic points, and once they reached the outskirts of Damascus, the regime's support just evaporated.
It's fascinating how these long-standing power structures can sometimes collapse so quickly. Do we have any insights into what's happening on the ground right now?
Yes, we're getting reports from our correspondent in Damascus. The scenes are, they're extraordinary. People are flooding the streets, tearing down posters of Assad, celebrating. But there's also a sense of disbelief, you know? After living under such oppressive rule for so long, it's hard for many to believe it's really over.
I can only imagine. What about the prisons? We've heard so much about Assad's notorious detention centers over the years.
Oh, that's one of the most heart-wrenching aspects of the situation. Families are rushing to these facilities, hoping to find loved ones who've been missing for years. Some are being reunited with relatives they thought were dead. But for others, they're finally getting confirmation of the worst. It's a mix of joy and deep sorrow.
That must be incredibly emotional. Do we have any numbers on how many people might have been held in these prisons?
The exact numbers are hard to pin down, but human rights organizations estimate that tens of thousands of people have disappeared into Assad's prison system over the years. Some reports suggest it could be as high as 100,000. And the conditions in these prisons, they've been described as nothing short of horrific.
That's just staggering. So what happens now, and how does a country even begin to recover from something like this?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The challenges ahead are enormous. You've got the immediate humanitarian needs: food, shelter, medical care for those who've been displaced or affected by the conflict. Then there's the task of rebuilding infrastructure, both physical and governmental. And perhaps most importantly, there's the process of reconciliation and healing. How do you bring a society back together after such deep divisions?
Right, and all of this while trying to establish a new government and gain international recognition. It sounds like a monumental task.
Absolutely. And that's where the international community comes in. The new leadership in Syria is going to need support to rebuild infrastructure, revive the economy, and create opportunities for people. But there's a delicate balance to strike. We've seen in other countries how foreign intervention, even when well-intentioned, can sometimes create more problems than it solves.
So, how are the opposition leaders approaching this transition? Do they seem prepared for the challenges ahead?
That's one of the more encouraging aspects of this situation. The opposition, particularly the leader we're hearing most about, Jolani, seems to be taking a more measured approach than we've seen in similar situations in the past. They're talking about maintaining the integrity of state institutions and avoiding the mistakes made in places like Iraq or Libya.
That's interesting.
He's now talking about the need for an orderly transition and protecting state institutions. It's a far cry from the hardline stance he once took.
It sounds like he's learned from past mistakes. But he's not the only player in this complex landscape, right?
Exactly. And that's what makes the next few weeks and months so critical. Can these various opposition groups come together to form a stable government? Can they gain international recognition and support? These are the key questions we'll be watching.
And what about the regional implications? Syria has been a crucial ally for countries like Russia and Iran. How do you think they'll respond to this change?
That's a great point. The fall of Assad represents a significant shift in the balance of power in the Middle East. Russia and Iran have invested heavily in propping up the Assad regime, both militarily and economically. They're likely to be very concerned about losing their influence in the region. On the other hand, countries like Turkey and the Gulf states, which have supported the opposition, may see this as an opportunity to expand their influence.
So it's not just about Syria, but about the wider geopolitical landscape of the Middle East.
Absolutely. And that's why the international response in the coming weeks will be so crucial. Will we see countries rushing to recognize the new government? Will there be a lifting of sanctions? These decisions could have a major impact on Syria's ability to rebuild and stabilize.
Well, as we wrap up, what do you think are the most important things for our listeners to keep in mind as they follow this developing story?
I think the key things to watch are how the opposition manages the transition of power, whether they can maintain unity and stability, and how they approach the enormous task of rebuilding the country, not just physically, but socially and emotionally as well. And of course, the international response will be crucial.
And what about the Syrian people themselves? What message do you think they would want the world to hear right now?
I think many Syrians would want the world to know that this is a moment of both joy and trepidation. There's relief that the Assad regime has fallen, but also anxiety about what comes next. They would likely ask for patience and support as they navigate this transition. And perhaps most importantly, they would want to emphasize that this is their moment, a chance for Syrians to shape their own destiny after decades of authoritarian rule.
Well, this has been an incredibly insightful discussion on such a momentous day for Syria and the entire region. Thank you for breaking it all down for us.
Thank you, and to our listeners, we'll be keeping you updated as the situation continues to unfold. Remember, what we're witnessing is not just a change in leadership, but potentially the birth of a new era for Syria and its people. The road ahead is uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, there's a glimmer of hope on the horizon. This has been Gen FM, bringing you in-depth analysis of world-changing events. Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.